Pharisees and the Sadducees. These were the religious system of the time. Jesus was so radical and such a heretic that he talked to women, which in those days was not entirely popular. You literally cannot understand the Hebrew Testament or the Bible unless you know a little bit about the social and economical times that they lived in. And in those days, if you were a woman in the Jewish faith, you had to observe segregation for up to 2 weeks in a month if you were menstruating, because blood was seen as impure. Anybody read The Red Tent by Anita Diamond? That talks about how the women used to withdraw for 2 weeks in the month, because if you're a woman and you've been at boarding school or lived in a community with other women, you'll know that your periods move round and join up to each other, and they all happen at the same time. So the women in a village would go off to the Red Tent and spend 2 weeks there away from the menfolk, and everybody had a perfectly good time about it, and nobody worried about it. But by the time we got to Jesus, this had become something that was seen as blood was dirty. So women were not touched. You did not touch a woman unless she was a member of your own family and you knew where her menstrual cycle was at. I mean, isn't that crazy when you think about it? But Orthodox Jews still follow that at the moment, nowadays. So women are, you can't, I tell this joke in my comedy set, because I used to be married to a Jewish guy, and I say how I couldn't really handle all the laws. I couldn't handle all the Jewish laws. There was the, you can't eat pork, you can't eat shellfish, but the social laws about touching women were the most difficult ones, because for 2 weeks in a month, my husband couldn't sleep in the same bed as me. He couldn't sit in this chair that I sat on. He couldn't hold my hand, let alone kiss me, because I was either menstruating or within the 7 days after that menstruation. He could eat what I cooked for his dinner, so that was okay, wasn't it? However, Jesus didn't give a rap about any of that. You know the story of the woman with the issue of blood? She went up and touched his clothes. That was the most incredibly brave thing to do. And we don't realize that, because she made him ritually impure just by touching his clothes. That meant he couldn't go to the temple for 2 weeks, and he'd had to have a ritual bath before he was allowed back into the temple. That's just how he was. Now, any of the Pharisees, Sadducees, or priestly class who'd been touched by a woman would have been furious with her. What does he say? He says, your faith has healed you. This man was kind, he was loving, he was gentle. It doesn't matter whether you think he was the Messiah or not. It really doesn't matter, because that gets into the power play. As soon as you go, Jesus is Messiah or he isn't Messiah, you get back into the ego, because the way the ego is wired, and the ego is wired not only to remember things, but it's wired into good and bad, up and down, left and right. The ego is entirely dualistic. So the ego is the summing up of what we would call the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, because we're still eating from that tree constantly, because we make things right or wrong all the time. You know, you get up in the morning, you think it's going to be a good day or a bad day. You listen to somebody speak, you either think they spoke well or you think they spoke badly. Or you can have bits in between as well. But the thing about the ego is once it locks onto a belief, it will start to say, this is the only one that's valid. That's when we start going wrong, because I'm right, therefore if you don't believe with me, you're wrong. And that is the wiring that went really, really wrong with everything. Now, the first Christians were fairly kind people, and oddly enough, there were an awful lot of women traveling with Jesus as well. I'm a Bible historian. I'm not a real PhD type expert. My job is to read the work of the PhDs and make them accessible for every day. I've written 20 books around this on Bible mysticism and things like that, and it's absolutely my passion in life, so forgive me if I go, because it is my passion in life. And I love the roots of Christianity. I do not love what it's become, because it's become, we're right, you're wrong. We've got the Messiah, you are all Philistines and unbelievers and wrong. And that is not Christianity, that is ego. Anybody says, I'm right, you're wrong, it's ego. Now, if you're planning to jump off Beachy Head and they go, I'm right, that's not a good idea, and then maybe you might want to listen to them. But in general terms, This is not a very good idea to make other people wrong. And it's also something that Jesus did not do. And if you think about how heretical Jesus was, he would have been a very annoying man for everybody out there. A very annoying man. For a start, he healed the centurion's son. There's a story of a centurion coming and asking him to heal. Now, this is an interesting one because the word could mean, in Greek, it could mean son, servant, or catamite. You know what a catamite is? A catamite is a young male lover. I actually said that in church one weekend, on one Sunday, and I said, you know, this could have been his gay lover, and one of the other congregations stood up and went, no! And walked out. That's when I know I'm getting successful in church, when people actually stand up and walk out. So this guy, this centurion, who is basically a commander in an invading force, an occupying force. It would be a bit like a Russian general in Kiev going up to President Zelensky and saying, help me. Because nobody in Ukraine would support a Russian commander. Jesus just said to this man, I have not found faith like this in all of Israel. To the enemy. It's no wonder they strung him up on a tree, really, isn't it, when you think about it?